Hi, and welcome to November and Beyond. Thanks for tuning in tonight. We're going to have Brian Beihl on the show. Brian is not only a friend of mine, but he works with Open Democracy Action, and they do a lot of good work around voting and the polls and that kind of thing, and trying to make sure people can vote and that things are fair, and offer assistance to voters and monitoring what's going on. It's going to be an interesting conversation. It's actually, we had this conversation a little while ago. I'm going to play back the tape. But I also would like to remind you that I'm Dave, and my contact information is below. I'm interested in talking to people who are running for office, and I'm interested in doing that, now and going forward as well. So if you've got 10 minutes to Zoom call and if you'd like to be on the show, please give me a ring at the number below. What else can I say? This is going to be all about voting, and we are in the final roundup here for sure. I've got my official document right here. Right here is the better way to do that, probably. We're gonna fill them out and walk them up to the town hall. I have that luxury because I live here in a lovely little small town, and we know everybody on the way, and we're going to hand it to the town clerk. And that's a really easy thing for us to do, but it's not an easy thing to vote everywhere, and there are some people who are trying to make it extremely difficult to vote. And boy, if you should be suspicious of that everywhere you see it. Anybody who doesn't want people voting, anyone who wants to make it harder for seniors, what are you, a 10, 11-hour wait? That's preposterous. One ballot box for 1 million people? Come on, people. There are some people who are really, really trying to prevent people from voting. And in my mind, that is the most anti-democratic, anti-American thing you can do, is to interfere with voting. So my guest today, Brian, he's one of the people who helps people vote. And if you need any assistance in getting to the polls or getting your ballots in, please contact Brian, or please contact your local election worker, your town clerk, or even send me an email and I'll connect you with one of these people. It's so important that people vote this time around. My whole family is going to take a march. Actually, Angus, I think, mailed his in. So we're going to test a couple of different facets of the system. But it's time to vote. Please vote. Get yourself out to the polls. One way or the other, ask for help if you need it. And that's it. Let's get on with the show. We're going to talk to Brian Beihl. So welcome, Brian. What's going on?
Hey Dave, how you doing?
Pretty good, thanks. Thanks for joining me today. And I just let people know you are with Open Democracy Action. And I suspect you have a busy season right now. Is that fair to say?
Oh, oh, no kidding. We are out straight. Basically, most of our effort is helping people to vote right now because of the COVID-19 complicated, how and where we're going to vote during the voting during the 2020 election season.
Sure. And it is complicated. Lauren and I and Bailey actually voted absentee this time around. But even the instructions that came with the thing, making sure you had both envelopes and just signing the right thing, you even had to put in some, it was an exception for voting absentee. You had to check the disabilities box or something that was just really strange.
Right, and part of that was, the COVID happened, and they had a lot of existing paper, and they didn't want to necessarily throw out all the envelopes. Being chintzy New Englanders, we didn't want to throw out anything that they thought was good, but as a result of that, made it very complicated for voters. So at the bottom of what you were just talking about, Dave, about the one side of the affidavit envelope said religious observance and physical disability. And the other side says, your absence because you're going to be out of town. And then at the bottom of it said, there's a fine and potential imprisonment if you don't tell the truth. Well,
Yes.
A lot of people said, well, I'm not disabled,
Yep.
so I'm not going to sign that. Or they signed both sides. What we found in the September 8th primary is they signed both sides of the affidavit envelope. Unfortunately, they relaxed some of the rules a little bit so that nobody could get in trouble for something like that, or their ballot would be invalidated. But there were a number of issues that were man-made: bad information, bad training by the Secretary of State, and so it made it kind of complicated.
That seems to me to be sort of one leg of the voter suppression. I mean, if Lauren and I struggled filling out a form, a little bit, but just enough. You got to think there's a lot of people, just like you said, even intimidated to, threat of perjury or whatever, intimidated to just get it done.
So even the absentee ballot application, this is what Open Democracy Action worked on, our regional democracy teams. When they allowed in June a change in the absentee ballot application, the Secretary of State, I don't know what they were thinking, but they brought out an absentee ballot application that had 2 paragraphs on the back, taking up about 5 or 6 inches on the back of the page, that were all crossed out. And people got it and said, did I get the right form? And they, because of the efforts of Open Democracy Action and a lot of other groups complaining to the Secretary of State saying, why on earth did you do this? They ended up taking that off. And I'll also tell you that affidavit problem that we were talking about earlier, we also managed to get a workaround. The Secretary of State finally said, okay, we'll make a yellow sticky tag and put it on the affidavit envelope to explain this. But all of these were Band-Aid after Band-Aid after Band-Aid. And it just raises some questions about the leadership in the Secretary of State's office and how well that they were communicating all of these rules out to people and to voters, but as well as to the clerks and moderators in the towns.
Right. So you guys were pretty active around the primary. How did things go, generally speaking, in the New Hampshire state primary?
Could have been better. So overall, there were no big disasters, not like what we saw in Nevada or Wisconsin. Maryland had a lot of issues. We didn't see any really huge issues. We saw, however, a lot of really troubling smaller issues. Number one is that the clerks, the town and city clerks, where when you do an absentee ballot or when you're registering to vote, that has to generally go through the town or city clerk's office. What that has done is that even in the primary that had 307,000 votes cast, where we expect 700,000 plus in the general election on November 3rd, the clerks were almost overwhelmed by the number of absentee ballots and the number of things they had to do. So it's a little scary come the last 2 weeks of October as to how the clerks are going to keep up with the volume of paper that they're going to be. And they get these absentee ballots in, and they have to log them into a computer system. So every one of these ballots, and we expect that in the general election, about 200,000 absentee ballots, just absentee ballots will be cast. And here's an interesting factoid for you. After all of the nonsense coming from the President of the United States on voting by mail, 23,000 plus Republicans voted by absentee in the New Hampshire primary.
Of course.
Yeah. So, and there were mailers that went out from the Republican Party soliciting some of those absentee ballots, absentee applications as well. So a little crazy.
Yeah. What were some other issues, whether they were widespread or individual? What types of things are you looking for?
Well, what we saw was a trend in towns, election workers in towns not knowing the rules. And I'll give you an example. So when they sent out their absentee ballot packages, we had our regional democracy team members take pictures of what they received in the mail, and they sent them to us. We have them up on our Open Democracy Action website. And what we found were inconsistencies all over the map as to what voters got. So because this was complicated, right, there were supposed to be instructions that were sent that address this COVID-19 special voting rule issue, and along with that sticky tag that we were talking about. And what we found was half of all the ballot packages that we got pictures of either had out-of-date instructions, no instructions, or incomplete contents of those absentee ballots. So in one case, there was no return address for the ballot to come back to the town. Nothing was stamped on the outer envelope. We saw in what is quite alarming, in 2 different towns, they gave no instructions whatsoever. You got your absentee ballot, your affidavit envelope, and your return envelope, and that was it. And then nothing else in there.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
It's the first time we've ever done this, or that they didn't bring, anywhere I go doing my work, I bring Plan B and Plan C that are going to work, at least going to work.
And if we'd had one of these packages show up, I'd say, okay, somebody didn't get trained. But because we saw so many of them, what that tells me is that there's a systemic breakdown in the training and the instructions coming from the Secretary of State's office. That's what we think is going on here.
Yeah. Anytime we see these little problems, I have started just looking up, because there's so many people pointing down and placing the blame. And somebody's going to say something like, well, it's up to the states. They get to do their individual thing. It's our freedom. And, you can't take that from us. But if that means, 1,000 different methods of doing this, as opposed to the one that is verifiable, I got to keep looking up. You're right. The Secretary of State, the governor, there are people who they should have solid Plan C in their pocket.
Well, here's an interesting thing with that the governor could have fixed and didn't. He had the opportunity, but vetoed a bill that would have would have implemented an online voter registration program in New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire is one of the very few states in the country that doesn't have some kind of electronic method of registering to vote.
Yeah.
And now, for a couple of months, we were violating the New Hampshire Constitution because our town clerks weren't open, and there was no way for people to vote or to register to vote. And our article, I think it's Article 11 in our New Hampshire Constitution, in Part 1, it guarantees accessible voter registration in New Hampshire, and that did not happen.
Yeah.
Now, it didn't happen. There was a gap there where the governor hadn't come out with any executive order saying, hey, it's okay for you to do this by mail. They finally did that, but it took them 3 months. And so that caused some problems. Here's another interesting thing too, that this wasn't just limited, all these problems weren't limited just to the absentee ballots, but we also had, in some towns, we had one town that the clerk was turning away voters who were walking to the polls with their absentee ballot in their hand to cast it. And the clerk said, sorry, you can't do that. You can't come to the polls directly. For 2020, this was a rule change that allowed people to do that. And they were not disenfranchised. They were allowed to vote in person, but they were forced into the polls to do that. We had another town where the deadline to turn that absentee ballot in is at 5 o'clock on election day, was allowing those absentee ballots to come in all the way till the polls closed at 7 o'clock. So, things like that. But again, we're talking about training issues here, and I think they have to work a little harder in getting everybody on the same page.
Yeah, but boy, even those little things, the inconsistencies, give anybody, whether they're legit or not, give anybody something to point at and say, aha, you people are doing this or not doing that. So Yeah, it's a bigger problem than it seems to be. All these little problems stacking up, and it really, it looks an awful lot like voter suppression to some of us looking on.
Well, there's a real fundamental thing that about the those absentee ballot packages, and if some people get instructions and are told how to do it, and some people are not given any instructions or bad instructions,
Yeah.
that's in unequal access to the polls, and that's a big deal, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know how that could get litigated, but I'm hoping we brought all of these things to the attention of the Secretary of State. We're hoping that
Excellent.
they do the right thing and communicate what their requirements are prior to the November 3rd election.
Mm-hmm.
It is a little scary when you have the President of the United States who is saying, that voting by mail and absentees are, fraught with fraud.
Are suspect. Yeah.
Yeah, that
To
is
begin
not
with.
the case. And in particular in New Hampshire, we've had some people in the last week who've said that I'm thinking about voting in person because I'm worried that my absentee ballot's not going to get counted. Well,
Yeah.
I do need to tell you that the faith that I have is in our people, in the communities in which we live. Those are the poll workers,
Yeah.
right? And there are Republicans in those polls, and there are Democrats in those polls. There are going to be observers in watching those ballots be opened and counted.
Yeah.
And so I have faith that in New Hampshire we're not going to see fraud because our friends and neighbors are doing the right thing and wanting it to be a successful election.
Yeah.
And I will also say on absentees that absentee ballots in New Hampshire, they get counted just like any other ballot, any other as if you voted in person at the polls. So not to worry about that. If you are going to cast an absentee ballot, go ahead and do it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I got my whoops the other way. I've got my background set up for you. I notice you have yours for the vote by absentee. Yeah, it's so important to get to feel the security, to know that your vote is going to count, and just all the mess with the postal system, which of course has to have been intentional, at least the way I'm looking at the game. And this mishmash with the ballots going out and the absentee process. There's just so many little reasons for people to get nervous about that sort of thing. How is the Secretary of State responding when you point these things out? What sort of response do you get?
A little bit of defensiveness, to be honest with you, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And they should be, and it wasn't just us pointing these out. There actually were some post-election evaluations that the Secretary of State did in Zoom meetings with clerks, with supervisors of the checklist, and with moderators.
Yeah.
And frankly, the Secretary of State got an earful from those groups. And there were a couple of letters that were circulated to the Secretary of State from those election workers saying, hey, we need to make some changes here.
Yeah.
So hopefully they take this in the spirit in which it was intended, because we want it to make a good, all the clerks are looking for is to be able to make it a successful election.
Yes.
So I think they're all doing the same thing, and groups like Open Democracy, we're all, working together to try and make it good.
Yeah. Excellent.
But having said that, Dave, one of the things you have to do as a voter is you personally have to pay attention to what's going on. You have to be sensible about how you cast your ballot. If you're gonna cast your ballot, let's say you're not registered, you need to register now. Don't do it at the polls, even though that's a possibility in New Hampshire. You can do that. But if you go to the polls, you're going to end up standing in lines, which isn't safe for the poll workers or for you.
That's the best way to do it. Yeah.
Right? So make those arrangements by contacting your town clerk or your city clerk and get in there, get the documentation done ahead of time. So you should be doing that right now.
Yeah.
If you're going to vote by absentee and you haven't requested your absentee, request it right now. And as soon as you get it back, as soon as you get your ballot, fill it out and return it right away. Don't wait. If you've already requested it, same deal, return it as quickly as possible. So what that's going to do is it's going to help the post office get that stuff delivered.
Yep.
And it also is going to help the clerks by giving them enough time to do that logging that I was talking about earlier.
Yep.
So do them all a favor by getting your stuff in early.
Absolutely. It's like everything else in life. Don't wait till the last minute. And you can tell. Spread out the load on the postal service. Spread out the load on the clerks. Heck, even let them get a little taste of what's coming up.
Sure.
So that's
one last note on that. So
Yep.
if you get to within 7 days of the election, then that's the time at which you need to bring your ballot directly to the clerk. And some towns are going to have drop boxes, but don't ever drop your ballot off in a drop box that doesn't have a person there saying you can do it. And they may look at your ID, but you can only drop off at a staffed drop box, or you can hand it to somebody in the clerk's office. That would be the best way to do it, or bring it to the polls and do it as we described earlier. You can bring it right in and hand it to an election worker on election day. But I wouldn't go into the post office anytime after 7 days before the election, because it's going to get a little crazy.
Yep, at least. And we were nice and early here in this household, but we walked them right up the street. I mean, it's a small town. We know everybody. We were absolutely sure we handed them to the right person. But yeah, you got to make sure you get the stuff done early for all those reasons, not the least of which is the doubt that's been sowed. Even just the doubt about the mail. Get it in, get it done. Well, so with all this being, I was just going to ask, how are things looking for November 3rd then, in terms of the process and procedure? Do you have an outlook for? Are they going to get it right? Are they making the changes right now?
Some changes have been made. Not enough, in our opinion. I think the Secretary of State needs to take a more leadership. That's what we need from the Secretary of State. I think we need voters to be more proactive, because we saw in the primary there were a lot of last minute ballots that came in. And I think we have to be thinking about ways that we can help. They still need poll workers in a lot of our towns. And if you are young and in good health, I would highly suggest one of the best things you could do for our democracy right now is volunteer with your local town clerk or your moderator and say, hey, I'm good. I'm going to wear a mask and I can help in the polling place. That would be a huge help in helping your community vote.
What a great way to participate, and giving in an area that it's definitely needed and it's not terribly hard. Whoever can, please, go out and see what you can do. Reach out to your town clerk and see how you can help at the polls.
Yep.
Great. Well, Brian, thanks for joining me today, and thanks for all the work that you do. And if people wanted to reach out and find out more about this, where can they find you?
They can get us at opendemocracyaction.org. And you're always welcome to contact me at brian@opendemocracy.me. And I'm glad to answer any voting questions. If you have questions about how to vote, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but I will help you in the how-to end of things. So more than happy to talk to you.
Excellent. Thank you. And if anybody's confused out there, you need to know who to vote for, you can call me and I'll just tell you. Well, there we go. Thanks for coming on. Yep. It's very nice to see you. And I suspect we'll check in again before the election, certainly after.
Fantastic, Dave. Glad to be here.
Take care. One more time for the folks who need it. It's so incredibly important that you get yourself out and vote this time around. Vote on any of the issues that vote for people who can do something for you. Vote for people who are working on causes that you care about, as opposed to believing that they're all evil and out to get you in some way. There's a little too much of that going on. Look for somebody with a decent policy, with some good ideas, somebody who's going to work for issues that you really care about, because the mudslinging is preposterous, at least most of it is. Please try to vote for somebody who's going to help the people in your community, including you. So there you go. It's another wrap up, and one way or the other, get yourself to the polls, and we'll be back next time. I guess we have a couple more shows before things wind down, and then we'll probably see you November 4th, and we can all either clink our glasses or sob together, one or the other. Have a good night, and we'll see you next time.